no matter what field I was in, whether that was banking because I was a bank manager for about a decade, or whether it was teaching college because I taught college once I left banking. Um, Being able to, swap the hats, um, understanding what things are transferable, because when you grow up and you go to college and you go to school and you go to work, you learn, transferable skills versus, transformational skills and just what the different skill sets are.
This is Because People Matter, a podcast about celebrating leaders who are harnessing the gift of human differences, creating inclusion while driving success in their organization and communities. Hosted by Dr. Helen Fagan, each episode features interviews with individuals who are leading the way. If you're ready to learn the impact becoming inclusive can have in your business, or wish to hear positive stories of impact, this is the podcast for you. Because People Matter is brought to you by Helen Fagan and Associates. We are changing the world one inclusive leader at a time. Go to helenfagan.com to learn more about what we can do for your organization.
Hello, friends, and welcome to today's episode. So today I have the privilege of interviewing someone that I was introduced to actually by my son, Marathon Jonathan Fagan, who lives in Los Angeles, California. Actually, his picture's behind me. Best friend, Nipsey Hussle. He works with the Marathon Company and works with Nas. And Nas and Jonathan hit it off mostly because they're children of immigrants. And the opportunity I had to sit down with Nas was really around this idea of how has bilingualism and the idea of growing up in between cultures impacted her courageous actions and willingness to just dive in and tackle things head on. I'm really excited for you to learn from her. And just a little bit of a sneak peek, we do actually get to talk about Jay-Z and her first time meeting him. So hang in there, enjoy the show. Hi, Naz. It's so nice to have you join us on the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I am just thrilled to get a chance to chat with you. I've been looking forward to this for weeks.
Same.
So, one of the things that I really want to start off with is for our audience to hear a little bit about your upbringing, your background, and how you believe that has impacted your life and your career.
Well, a little bit about my upbringing and background. I guess we can start with I was born and raised in Queens, New York, to a lovely couple that immigrated here from Bangladesh. My parents are both born and raised in Bangladesh. My grandparents are from a couple different places, but all in that same general area. My family is practicing Islam. So they are Muslims. They are pretty hardcore, I'd say. Very practicing, very much into the traditions and the customs. And my parents being immigrants, obviously coming to the US, they held on to a lot of the cultural traditions and practices that they had growing up, whether those were influenced by the country they were in or they were influenced by Islam itself. They held on to a lot of it. And so it was very present and prominent in my life from birth, honestly. Um, you know, Islam was definitely an element of my life that I can say helped shape me. My mom is being such a practicing Muslim is very, very conservative. So of course I was raised by an immigrant mother who is very, very conservative, very traditional. So I was kind of expected growing up to either take on or kind of carry the torch in regards to, the career that she may have had, the way that she tended to the house and kept the home. So a lot of these things were very prevalent in my life. Definitely a lot of influence within just even how I, ended up carrying myself as the woman that I am today as a young professional. That mindfulness, that conservative, um, you know, I'm trying to think. The conservative, very um I guess it's not really modern, but there's a word for it. I can't remember.
Modest?
Modern. I'm like, it's not modern. It's okay. Yes, very modest approach in life. A lot of that was definitely taught to me. So being modest, being mindful, being humble, being reserved, being conservative. A lot of these are kind of mannerisms that I've now taken to just as a young woman myself.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's really interesting because I grew up in a Muslim family in Iran, and immigrated to, well, went to school in England, then came to go to school here in the U.S. And one of the things that I learned about myself with the whole modesty piece that you're talking about is from the time I was very young, I was taught that you don't look men in the eye who are not your family members, because that's what loose women did, or whatever you call it, whatever the term is. And so I didn't realize that the way that I adapted my behavior, my mannerism is I tend to look people between their nose and their chin instead of making that direct eye contact. And it wasn't until I was studying how culture influences behavior about 25 years ago that this kind of became evident to me that this is part of who I am and how I practice.
Mm.
So, very fascinating that you bring up the idea of your life and career choices and those things as being influenced by your mom and the expectation from Islam. Yeah. And did you grow up in a bilingual home?
Yes, I grew up in a bilingual home. Bengali was actually my very first language. My parents still speak to me in Bengali. I speak back in, I like to call it Banglish. uh,
Yeah.
but I do speak Bengali fluently, so I understand everything they say and I respond to them however I can. But Bengali definitely was technically my first language, my first learned language.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. The reason I asked that is because of the neuroscience research on individuals who are bilingual and how that shapes their brain and the brain's capacity to be adaptable, flexible, and even most recent research with Alzheimer's as being likelihood of it is being reduced because of that bilingualism. So, yeah, so very fascinating. You just described a little bit of what it's like to be multicultural and bilingual as being able to transition. You've had some transitions in your career, and you and I talked about that. And I'd love for our audience to hear about those transitions and how mentors helped you to make those transitions.
I've definitely made a few different transitions within my career, and from very different, realms and departments of, just the workforce for sure. The importance of mentors, I'm really actually glad that you bring that up. Um, Not very long ago, one of the very first people to champion and support me in my career. I think I actually mentioned this to you in our conversation. His name was Jay Hatch. Jay Hatch actually recently passed away, so he's
Mm.
no longer with us. But very early on in my career, um, was just a resource and a support system. It was a gentleman, obviously. His name was Jason, an older man, a veteran in the music business, as far as like this recent transition of careers that I've kind of gone through. And I met him probably in about 2018, 19 ish. I had heard of him for many, many years from my former partner, my business partner. Um, but he just opened up to me and was like, you're an intelligent young lady. You've been a bank manager. You've now been teaching college at that time. You've been teaching college now for a couple of years, and now you want to venture off into the music business. The music business doesn't require, for you to have studied how the realm of music works as far as publishing rights and ownership and all the other elements of it that sometimes we don't really speak on too much. There you can read up on that in a matter of minutes, and then you'll be well versed and fully understand how to kind of handle and navigate the world. It was just the way that he very, very respectfully and politely believed in me. He opened up the door and was like, if you ever have any questions, if there's anything you don't understand, like no question is dumb or stupid. So please don't hesitate to ask. And so he was one of the very, very first people, aside from my business partner, who definitely taught me a lot of the ropes because I had kind of joined him at that time to, embark on this, venture of I'm going to help him grow his business because I have an MBA and I teach college and I do all this, this other stuff in business. I decided that that was kind of what I was going to do. And so having someone like a Jay Hatch was really nice. But one of the things that I did notice also very early on was just the, I guess, the demographic or the makeup of the music business, so to speak. It was very, very, and still is male dominated. It's a lot of male identifying dominated people in the business. So I did not see very many women. And then on top of that, I did not see very many women of my sort of minority. There are definitely, certainly lots of women of minorities and several kinds of minorities within the music business, but no South Asian woman of my sort. So the importance of mentors, it's incredible because obviously they will champion you from the beginning and possibly, maybe even help work off those nerves about making a transition into a new business. But after, kind of getting my feet wet, I hadn't been in the business very long when I realized that there wasn't a lot of female mentorship around, let alone, someone that maybe I could closely relate to. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but mentors are important.
Yeah, mentors are important. So now I want to circle back around to kind of the first part of what I was thinking. Um, and Luke, maybe for editorial purposes, we could put the response to this question first, because the first part was, the benefits of being multicultural and bilingual, that flexibility and that adaptability. So, how do you think, and since our audience doesn't know
Right.
that you were in banking, that teaching college, getting your graduate degree, and then now you're at Roc Nation. And where you got started in music and then moved into your position at Roc Nation. Maybe being able to have you describe the benefits of growing up in a multicultural home and bilingualism that had given you kind of this anything is possible. I can transition careers.
Yes. So, with regards to growing up in a multicultural home, from a very, very young age, excuse me, from a very, very young age, I kind of learned how to wear several hats. In the home, I was, Molly. That's actually my nickname. In the home, I was Molly. I was, Muhammad and Latifa's daughter. They're Bengali, people that immigrated, from Bangladesh, started a life here. So in the house, I was the Bengali Muslim daughter, and I made sure to play the part and try to fulfill the expectations that my mother had set for me, coming from a completely different country and a different background. So very early on, I was able to identify with, okay, this is who I need to be inside the house because I live here and these are my parents. And then I learned who I was outside of the house, which was Nazia, the student, Nazia, the, show choir member, Nazia, the girl who was, in class council, student council, there was a lot of wearing very many hats that I had learned how to kind of do at a very young age coming from such a different background and household. In the house, we spoke Bengali and we ate Bengali food, and that was it. But as soon as you walked outside the house, it was a completely different world. We live here in America where Western culture, language, society, lifestyle, all these things are so very different. So, very early on, I kind of had to just know how to be a fly on the wall and also kind of be accepted, because I was learning something so completely different in the household than what my friends and everyone else was doing outside. There was a lot of, I wouldn't necessarily call it an identity crisis, right? Because it is like two completely different personalities that I kind of, fostered and grew into. But now knowing how to navigate, between what's in the house and what's outside the house definitely helped me just in the field, period. No matter what field I was in, whether that was banking, because I was a bank manager for about a decade, or whether it was teaching college, because I taught college once I left banking. Um, Being able to, swap the hats, um, understanding what things are transferable, because when you grow up and you go to college and you go to school and you go to work, you learn, transferable skills versus, transformational skills and just what the different skill sets are. I learned a lot of that early on, just in the house. I had to learn what was transferable, what was, what made sense where. So, coming from a multicultural background, definitely in a lot of ways, subconsciously kind of wired me, to your point of neuroscience, to be able to navigate, different worlds and spaces that I was in.
Oh, yeah, for sure. If you've not read the book for our audience, Third Culture Kids, I highly recommend the study of Third Culture Kids, because Third Culture Kids, what you just described, Naz, is exactly that. Third Culture Kids grow up. The original research was around children of expats or children of missionary or military. Basically, you're growing up in a place where your passport is different than the country.
Mhm.
It extended and expanded to children of immigrants. So in the home, I speak this language, I behave this way, I eat this food, I celebrate this holiday. Outside the home, I do these other things, right? And so the brain is constantly going back and forth. And the concept of third culture is that adaptation, the adaptive strategies that you deploy from a very, very early stage. And so when we think about those neural pathways that become neural highways, they are so much a part of your who you are, is
Mhm.
what you've just described. And often you said identity crisis. Often individuals will enter my college classroom, or I'm coaching this an executive, and they'll be like, when I was with Bengali people, I wasn't Bengali enough because I'm, this American behavior. Or when I'm with Americans, I'm not American enough because just look at me, I'm not whatever. Right. So I am questioning, who am I? Where do I fit in? And what I extend is, who you are is a person who's adaptable and flexible and can fit in many places. That is the gift you bring into the world. And so I love how you described all of that. um, One of the things that we've learned in our research with inclusive leaders is that they are really comfortable leaning into these challenges that present themselves with an incredible amount of curiosity. And it sounds like you have been able to do that well. What would you tell young Nas who had just applied at Roc Nation? Um, and then what would you tell other young multicultural women to encourage them?
Um, it's not about, I guess, it's not about what you look like. It's not about where you're from. Yes, those things are important and they shape who you are and what you bring to the table. But neither of those things should ever be a factor when deciding to take the leap of, applying for a new job and making a new transition, because it's who you are at the root, right? It's the skill sets that you've developed over the years. It's the professional that you've become, since you've been working in the workplace. It's the student that you were when you were an undergrad student to, the graduate student that actually graduated. It's who you are today and how you handle being in certain situations that are going to make you successful and that make a person successful. Your ethnic background should never be seen as something that can possibly hinder you, because we just even touched on just how transformational I think that it made me, how it helped me from a very young age, subconsciously and unconsciously be able to navigate different spaces and do so fearlessly, because of how it equipped me from that from the back end, like of who like how I was raised, not necessarily all the things that I learned and all that other stuff, but from the root of who I am, like as far as how I was raised, um, I think that, they are almost like springboards. We should see them as springboards and a lot more as advantages than as something that could be a setback. Because I also mentioned earlier that when I had a mentor very early on and it was a gentleman, and then I did realize that it was a mostly male dominated industry, I did realize that there weren't other people that looked like me. Like none of those things stopped me. Even when I did realize, like, like this is actually not here. Like I actually don't see me literally in any of these people. Even though I didn't, I knew that, I was confident in myself. I was confident in the woman that I've become and the skill sets that I've developed and the professional that I am today. And I know what I can bring to the table. I know the type of personality I bring as a leader. And I know that it's a type of personality that works, um, you know, for lack of a better word. So none of those things matter.
Yeah, yeah. I remember in our earlier conversation, you mentioned that um, there weren't women, Southeast Asian women, women, and you were going to be working with people who were, ethnically, racially very different from you, and that your self talk was really one of exactly what you just said. None of that matters. It's all about who you are and how you show up into the play into that work environment and what you're contributing. That really that was what you told yourself, and that proved to be the way that you have gained your success in every industry that you've been in.
Yeah. Because at some point, every one of those industries was new.
Mhm.
I was making that transition, whether it was from student to, banker and bank manager, whatever it was, every single one of those transitions at one point was something very new. And I definitely had to be fearless about it.
Yeah. So what unique challenges do you think women face in such a male dominated environment, such as the entertainment or music industry, that you think are maybe different from, say, banking or higher education?
I think in music and entertainment, it's almost like it is in any other business. The way that women tend to be viewed in banking, medicine. I've never worked in medicine. I'm just assuming also because of the different industries that I have worked in and because I know that it has been common. Um, and prevalent in all the industries, it's the same challenge, you're a woman, the way that you handle things, the way that our personalities are, the way that our um just, our mannerisms, like they're motherly, we're more compassionate. There's so many different things that I'm sure that, people can compare when it comes to, leadership from a heterosexual male versus leadership from a heterosexual female. Like, no matter what industry you're in, I think that those challenges are the same. Oh, we're emotional, we're this, we're that. You deal with all the same things. There was
Mm,
nothing new in this industry because even banking and finance, back when I started, was a lot more male dominated than it is now. Now you see a lot more female managers. And that number was increasing even when I was a female manager. And I was a manager at 22 years old at a bank. So I was super young, not a lot of women around. But that was also a time when, banking was also changing and the demographic and the diversity within the banking system as far as the employees changed. But no real difference, we're emotional. Men wonder if we'll be able to handle a load. When women become mothers and they take time off, they're gone. Like you deal with all the same things of, you're going to have to take a break from your clients. Your clients know that you're a woman and you're going to have to step away. How does that kind of make them feel? Hasn't posed any new challenges, when I was a bank manager, I'm sure if I had chose to become a mother, my team would have wondered what was going to happen to them for the next 9 months, maybe 10, maybe a year, who knows? And that could be very similar here. If I do choose to start a family, what happens to my clients now? So I feel like the obstacles and the challenges that I've faced are not necessarily any different. They're about the same, in any business where it's male dominated.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting that you talk about, women as really experiencing similar things across, and there are those similarities for sure. What it was it- During COVID, everybody went home. Teaching in academia at a university, and the people are like, oh, you're going to have so much more time on your hands. And then the kind of during COVID, what had ended up happening was research publications increased, right? Publication outputs increased, and people were like, wow, publication outputs increased, that's great. Well, yeah, but look at the demographic they increased for: the men, not the women, because going home didn't necessarily mean that they now had kids at home, and they had all these other things, and so that impacted. So yeah, you're right. And some of the challenges I think that we face as women across all industries is the perception of what is the role of a woman,
Mhm.
right? If a woman is a strong leader, the nickname she's given isn't as positive as a man who's a strong leader,
Mhm.
right? So the perception of how you show up and carry yourself, male, female, that perception is definitely impacted. Um, One of the things you and I talked about was organizational behavior. Having an MBA, you know, that concept of organizational behavior. And some of the things you've described are, the challenges, the kinds of things that people who are organizational behaviorists are studying of how do people behave when they are in organizations. It sounds like your professional experience from a very young age has helped you not only gain an interest in organizational behavior, but really be able to have firsthand experience with that. So, as a person who studies inclusion and diversity, and really developing that, how do you think diversity and inclusion influences effective organizational behavior?
Um, I think it affects it in a lot of different ways. Having people of different backgrounds, upbringings, education, levels of education, all of those things contribute to an organization, because at the end of the day, it is those people that are working for this said organization. So having diversity, I think, has proved to me in my experience to be advantageous. You have It's like when you're brainstorming for something, you want to pull all the best creative ideas when you're brainstorming for a project or a film or anything. If I have all of the same types of people with the same qualifications, with the same upbringings, with the same backgrounds, with the same ethnic, roots as far as like where their family might be from, I don't really know how different those ideas are going to be. Yes, people are different, right? Because none of us share the same DNA. So I get that. That can for sure be said and confirmed and, proven to an extent. But even if those people are different, all of the experiences, everything that they've learned, that's what makes us all different, right? So if all of these people had the same type of experiences, then it's a high chance that the type of ideas I'm going to crunch out of that brainstorm session might be very across the spectrum. Like everyone might have a very similar, idea or set of ideas. Whereas when you have people who come from completely different walks of life, no two people are the same, kind of like it is for me in my work, right? So I'm no, definitely not the same as anybody else in there. I think it's advantageous to the company, not just from a representation standpoint, right? Of like, oh, this is our company. And then you see all sorts of people, right? Not just from a representation aspect, but also from that productive, like how creative are they? How productive are these people? Everyone comes from a completely different background, experience, education, training, which makes them all so diverse. And I think it works to the advantage of a company, and it has definitely worked to my advantage at my current job and any of my previous jobs, just because I feel like the quality of conversation and the just how broad, like, the pots from which these people are pulling, which we can call, like, the pots their brains, right? It's just they're all different. All of these pots all came from different places. It's made of different clay, it's made of different sand, dust, whatever it is. And it helps because all of that exposure, all of those experiences, all of that can now contribute to all this great ideation that we can come together and do.
Yeah. Diversity and inclusion is the birthplace of innovation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or if we do it well, if we take the diversity of human experience and we leverage those differences in a way that makes people feel valued and cared for, innovation skyrockets. So, yeah,
Okay.
we've seen it in our research. We see it every day in what we're doing. So, if you could teach young leaders, or if you could teach leaders how to work with young people, because generational differences seems to be a biggie, across right now, I think there's like 5 generations working together. If you could teach leaders how to successfully create space for young people from different walks of life, what's something you would tell them?
I mean, you just got to do that. You got to be approachable. You have to be approachable. And approachable can look a zillion different ways. So there's that part of it too. What does approachable mean to you? What does approachable mean to someone else? What does approachable mean to that person? In an organization where there's all different types of people, different tiers, different levels, different experiences, different backgrounds as far as education, culture, all those things. Um, be open-minded. Be
Mhm.
open-minded, be approachable, because that is really all any human needs to do to survive in any situation, honestly, not just a professional one. You can apply that in your personal life and it'll work.
Yeah, yeah. Some great wisdom for those leaders out there listening in the audience. Okay, I got one last question. You work at Roc Nation. I want to know, have you ever met Jay-Z?
Oh, yes, yes, I have.
Tell us about that.
Oh, well, my first time, I just saw him a couple weeks ago, actually, completely different interaction. But my very, very first time meeting him, I actually was cutting a corner in a hallway. I was on my phone with my headphones in. I was on a Zoom. I do this often at the office. Sometimes if I just get tired of sitting, I'll just start walking around. I actually ran into him. So I cut the corner and he's obviously a very tall man. And so I cut the corner and I was just like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." Like, I think I had only been there for all of a couple months. So I was super embarrassed by running into or nearly trampling myself into Mr. Carter, but I caught myself, I think, at a good time. He and I were probably still about like a foot apart. So that was still too close, I was like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." So that was my first time. Encounters have obviously changed, thank God. But a very definitely one I'll never forget.
So I got a question for you. What do you observed about his leadership style? Obviously, he has been very successful at creating an organization that can take those different perspectives, those different life approaches and views, and create this magnificent amount of success. What is it about his leadership approach that you think leads to that?
Based on my experiences alone, and it's a limited handful of encounters and experiences with him and in situations where I've heard him speak. Kind of going back to like being open-minded. I think
Mhm.
he's very aware of what's happening. And I think he's almost like a sponge. Like he continues to be aware and I think he's open to having conversations. I have a couple clients that I support that I know on countless occasions have picked up the phone and called him for maybe advice, anything that they needed. And so I know just based on stories and hearsay and experiences that have been, shared with me by the people that I work with, I think he's someone who is very open-minded and he very much seems to be. Not a man of too many words, but just enough, I guess, is how I would probably put it. Just very impactful, purposeful, not too many words, but he listens. I think he listens and observes and hears a lot more than, anything. And that's, it's my experience. This is why I think what makes him so great is probably just how open and approachable he is.
Oh, I love that. That's so good. That's so good. So, where can our audience find out more about you and your company and your work?
They can definitely find me on LinkedIn. My name on LinkedIn is Nazia Mollah. That's NaziaMollah. LinkedIn is where I definitely keep and build a lot of my network as far as people that I'm going to work with, collaborate with, building new relationships. I do a lot of that there. I do have a social media. It's also Nazia.Mollah. That social media page is kind of more so for my consulting business. So that's kind of where a lot of my side consulting inquiries go. But LinkedIn is probably the best place.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Naz, for making time for this conversation. You have a wealth of information, but more importantly, you have a way of inviting people into the conversation and really encouraging people from wherever they are to pursue their goals and their dreams. And I am just thrilled that I had the opportunity to get to know you. Um, Thanks to Marathon John, I got to put that out there for connecting us.
Thank you, Marathon John.
Yes. All right. Thank you.
This has been Because People Matter, a podcast about celebrating leaders who are harnessing the gift of human differences, creating inclusion while driving success in their organization and communities. You can find links to any resources mentioned in today's show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. Thank you for listening. Because People Matter is brought to you by Helen Fagan and Associates. We are changing the world one inclusive leader at a time. Go to helenfagan.com to learn more about what we can do for your organization.